Hello and welcome to Tremaine Sci-Fi Hour. Today we are interviewing Katherine Nichols. So to kick us off, because you do a lot, you have a lot to do with female protagonists and a lot of things with feminism in fiction. Um, how do you think fiction's changed in the past, say, 20 or 30 years? A lot of take the book 1984 has been considered quite controversial nowadays because of the way that it can make some women feel when reading it. How do you think that's changed, or do you think it's still stuck in the past?
Well, that's really interesting because before I really got started publishing books or getting my books published, I taught English, high
Right.
school English, for
Oh,
a very long time, and we studied 1984. It's interesting you said that because I felt like it really was almost a feminist book. I mean, the horrible things that happened to the women in that book were so extreme, and the attitudes toward the women were so extreme that I felt like the author was saying, "Hey, look at what we're doing." And
right.
that's the way I taught it, which is very interesting. He might have not meant that at all. And I might have been teaching it to my viewpoint, which is really the way readers approach things. We
Yes.
read it
Yes.
based on us. So, yeah, I think you have to be understanding of the time period. And 1984 was very predictive. So I always felt like that it's not just predictive. And we also did Brave New World, which is,
Oh, yes. Aldous
yes,
Huxley's. Yeah.
yes, Huxley. Yeah. So yeah, we always approached the literature with a historical lens.
Which is very important to do because a lot of these old works, though they are very interesting and very great, they they sometimes have views that we no longer hold. Um, so how would you? Are you there?
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Sorry, your image just froze.
it's
Um,
quiet.
yeah. When so take some okay, let's look at it in a more general sense. We'll come back to books, but for movies, for example, which are now where a lot of people get their fiction as well as television. How do you think that books are ahead of them or behind them in terms of the way that they treat female protagonists?
Oh, I think books are doing a much better job. And it's kind of frustrating. Sometimes you'll read the book, and when the movie's cast, it's like that's not the way the women were supposed to look or be at all.
Right,
So I think we have that Hollywood approach to the youth culture and the beauty culture. And I think it's very difficult for lots of books to make that transition when you have the star of your novel is an ordinary woman. Now she may become able to do extraordinary things and she
right.
may recognize that she can, but she's not some gorgeous Hollywood blonde or
Starlet, yeah,
brunette.
yeah.
Right. So it can be hard.
Right. So, and then there's also the idea that they have to sell the film, isn't it? That element of what do you call it? Corporate, yeah,
Commercialism. Yeah.
commercialism, yeah, where money is becoming more important than the artwork itself. Would you say that also has a impact on how women are being treated in this regard?
Yes. And I think it also has a strong impact on when you're writing women characters, and whether you're writing them hope with the hope that someday they become screen characters. But when you're writing women characters, it can be very difficult to market a book if your character doesn't meet whatever you think the audience is going to want. So it's very difficult. I think you have to write for yourself first, but realize you want other people to read it. And maybe that's the same thing with movies or with anything else, is that you have to approach it from the standpoint of staying true to yourself and your voice. But what if you don't want other people to read it? Why are you writing it? Why are you
Right.
making the
Yeah.
movie?
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, it's not polite to ask a woman's age, but when you
I
were,
hope.
I- yeah, but when you were first sort of aware, when you were first reading and things like that, did you notice like because you've said in previous things that you became a feminist at quite a young age. Did you notice some of these things in these books that were being released at the time? That
Well, I'm sorry. When I first started reading, I remember reading, we called them the little blue biography books. And I read about Amelia Earhart and I read about
right,
Clara Barton. So I tailored my own reading to attitudes I didn't really even know I completely had.
right.
But so that, go ahead. I'm sorry. I think I interrupted you.
Oh no. So I just well, and actually that is interesting. So a lot of these historical figures have been whitewashed to a degree, especially to do with female and minority group people who've had views that may not really be in line with what people want at the moment. Do you think that some of that literature you read at that time misled you about these people, about these like for Amelia Earhart, for example, she went up against great odds against a very sexist society. Do you think that was accurately represented, or do you think it was a little, softened?
Well, at that age, I think it was more softened in the fact that they didn't really want us to know she probably died, because it was very young.
Yeah,
So, but where I definitely noticed it when I first started teaching, I had a degree in history too.
right.
And it was funny because I studied British history,
Oh,
loved all the kings and queens and that sort of thing. And they needed me in American history. And I realized very quickly that a lot of people just got flat out left out. They just disappeared. And they were women or people of color. And they're not in the history books. Now, with the advent of the internet and our access to updated versions, it's so much more challenging and exciting to take a look at that and go outside the history book. Unfortunately, especially in the United States, our teachers are having trouble trying to balance whatever it is going on with not with parts of the public not wanting kids to know the truth about ourselves, and they're having to try to balance that with
right,
knowing what they know. So I had hoped that this would not be a topic we'd be talking about when I first started teaching, that we would have worked through it, but I guess it's going to be with us for a long time.
right. And that's a very when you said that, I thought about Stalin, that sort of whole making people disappear, and that whole, oh, that never happened because there's no evidence of it happening.
Right.
And that's happening in America. That's not exactly, from a foreigner's point of view, that's not exactly what we think of when we think of America. Though that is, I think, starting to become more aware as we get more people from America telling us we never learnt about. I think there's things like the War of 1812 that was brushed over, or slavery, or during the abolitionist periods and things like that.
We did. I would say, well, having taught high school students, especially, they're
Right,
going to tell you they didn't learn an awful lot that we certainly tried to teach.
right.
But
Oh yes, I see.
if they don't remember it, I guess we didn't teach it well enough. But no, we had that in school, but there was always a different slant to it. We knew about abolitionists, we knew about slavery, but it was much more subtle. For example, now it's recognized that slavery was a major cause of the Civil War.
Right,
But in the history books, it was only one of three contributors.
right,
So, we're hearing that and because of where we were raised.
right. Okay.
Oh, I'm from the South, in case
Uh,
you can't tell.
I had a slight suspicion.
Yes.
um, Yeah, so you also you also come from an area where that topic would be sensitive as well to a lot of people who feel that their heritage, for whatever reason, is being interfered with in that way.
Yeah, I have no. I originally was born in a city called Chattanooga, Tennessee. Big Civil War battleground areas, and a great deal of making heroes out of statues. And
Right,
then we learn what really was behind it, and it's challenging because we we miss we were led to believe that our heritage was tied in with things that it really wasn't or never should have been.
right.
So I think that shows the power too. A lot in a lot of historical fiction, some of those things are corrected now. I don't
Right.
write historical fiction, but I do notice that a lot of times those views are challenged, and I think that's a good use of fiction.
But so, and just changing the topic slightly, I think fiction, especially, has a power in it to influence young people, especially because that begins to open them to a whole new world. I know someone like George R. R. Martin talks about how when he was born, his life was broken down into three streets as a child because he didn't have the money or they didn't have the resources to move out of there. So books were a way to escape into a different world. So that makes me wonder how much of what we are talking about now is has been influenced by the small world and the lack of reading.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I'm thinking of, the traditional canon that we teach in the classroom, and how we when when I was still teaching, I've been retired from that for a while, we were starting to break loose. We were starting to do multicultural literature. We were starting to
Oh,
read works by Chinese American citizens, and we were really opening that viewpoint, and that's still going on. I I never understand when people say they don't like to read, because, like, for me, it was just everything.
yeah.
I don't get that, but yeah, I don't really understand why people are frightened by books. I've never understood that, but I think it's because I've always recognized the incredible power that they have,
Oh
and
yeah.
maybe some of these people are just starting to get how powerful they are.
I think if I think we can see that, especially if you look in Nazi Germany during
Mhm.
the wars, they burnt books in in the millions that along with other things, but they were they were frightened of information. They were frightened of intellectuals, and the same in the Soviet Union. And in a lot of dictatorships, is the first to go usually the ones that know how to read.
I remember reading about the Khmer Rouge
Oh, the
in
Khmer Rouge, yeah,
Cambodia,
yeah,
and they one of the first things they people that they sent to the camps were people with glasses,
yeah.
soft hands, and teachers, because the soft hands and glasses indicated you probably spent some time inside reading, and of course the teachers we're a dangerous group.
You influence children, yes. I mean, and children belong to the revolution in that in their thinking, isn't it? Yeah. So okay, that's been very interesting. And then so I'm an aspiring writer, so
Oh, yay.
I'm hoping to get published as well. So what are some tips you would give to us and those that group of people, especially, having had all this experience with social issues and things like that?
One of the best things that I did, and I didn't really want to do it, was join a critique group,
Right.
because you have a level of support, camaraderie, and accountability. Plus, you have to read, well, in ours, we read our works out loud, which was just horrible for me, because I could
Yeah.
stand up in front of a class and read just about anything. I could read, talk about just about anything. But when I was exposing my writing
Right.
and had to actually read it, it took me forever to not get the shakes. And once you get past that, it's just so helpful, and people will make, you really need a group you trust. It may take a while to find one,
Right.
but if you are able to influence and set the tone of how you critique and what you do, then I think it's very, very helpful to be able to bounce things off these people. And my first critique group was very small. And then one of the gentlemen in that said I should join this other one, which was so big it scared me. It wasn't really that big, but I don't like them much bigger than 8 or 10. And this one was about 12. But I went to the mixed, like as in, what is it, heterogeneous group. And it was good. I got lots of feedback from the men in the group that was good. However, and I'm sure you know this, except in the science fiction area, most of the books are bought by women. I mean, predominantly we read more, even like internationally, I think, than men do. So while my writing is suspenseful women's fiction,
Right.
and I didn't really like calling it women's fiction because I read
It,
everything. But
it,
yeah, I love everything, and I read nonfiction, but it's all about what shelf it's going to go on, and that the marketing.
yeah.
So, but I ended up branching out a little, or trimming the branches, I suppose is better. We formed a all women critique group that came from the original one and still went to the original one. Unfortunately, I've moved too far right now from that group, but so I'm looking for another critique group. But the women's group was great because we were smaller and we had more time to talk about the motivations of our characters and not just how did this sound. And because I always found that sometimes people will make a comment and sometimes I'll be honest, I would just pretend to make a note because I knew that wasn't what I wanted to change. I wasn't going to do
Right.
it.
Yeah.
But almost every single time that happened, when I went back to that passage, I realized there was something that could be better about it. It wasn't
Right.
necessarily what they had said. So just having people point these things out to you is so wonderful. What was really fun about the all women's critique group is we called ourselves Wild Women Who Write. And we were listening to podcasts, and someone asked me to be on a podcast the first time. And after I did it, I said, we could do a podcast. So we have a podcast called Wild Women Who Write Take Flight. And our purpose is our main goal is to show the importance of writers supporting writers, but specifically women authors supporting one another. And that has got, we've interviewed, we started with local Southern authors, and most of them came to my house, and we would have wine and cheese and just have a good time and then talk. Then pandemic kept messing with us, and we Zoomed more. And we've had people from California and New York, and we've just had some wonderful time doing it. And it all came out of this purpose of being supportive to each other. And you may be writing because you want to be published. You may just be writing because you have a story you want some people to hear about. You might be writing for your family, but we support whatever you're writing for. Of course, the people who are serious about it want other people to read it. They want, you want someone to buy your book and like it. So start with a critique group. It did give me a certain level of accountability. I'm pretty good about keeping I don't have like a rigid schedule. I'm not good at that, but I have a word count in my head of what I need to be by the end of the week. Well, with the writing group, you brought 5 pages and shared it, and it would be rude to not come if you didn't have your pages. But I didn't want to come if I wasn't going to get a turn. So I always had pages to do. So I highly recommend that. And just keep writing. Like there are periods in your life when you're not going to have time to do the writing because very few people make a lot of money writing. So probably like Faulkner, one of my favorite Southern authors, he worked, I think, at a paper bag factory and actually would stop and write ideas on the paper bags as they came out. And because he had to live. So, but don't stop writing and don't think that you're too old. I mean, quite frankly, I feel like I'm in my 3rd act. I wrote all along, but when I was teaching and had a family, it was very difficult. I continued to do some work after I retired from full time teaching. And then that's when I said, I got to do this. I got to go back and revisit the stories I started and start some new ones. And I've been able to do it. So,
Yeah, and that's very important that people remember that it's not over until you're in the box, I suppose.
exactly, exactly. And I kind of wanted to leave something behind that maybe once I've been long past the box, that someone will come across on a bookshelf and like, oh yeah, I'll read this. So it's an ego a little bit, but for me, it was just something that I couldn't stop. I think if you really write, you're not happy unless you're doing it, and sometimes you're miserable when you're doing it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it mostly brings me joy. So
I think there's a saying. There's that I hate writing, but I love having written. That's
exactly, exactly. And I never hate it. What I hate is the time right before I sit down.
yeah,
Like, I know I need to sit down. I've got to sit down. I've got to do this. And I'm like, yeah, but I kind of like a snack. Or I think the dog wants to walk.
yeah,
Once I get there, I'm in another world and I like it, but it's
yeah.
hard to get there.
I know because I write science fiction when I'm trying to sit down and think about it. I just sit there because it's science fiction. Some of it sounds ridiculous. You know what I mean?
Well,
That sort of what am I talking about? You know,
well, the world building. I think
well,
that's the hardest thing about science fiction.
the
It's all that
world.
world building.
I've made like aliens that have like a flap over their mouth that they lift up to demonstrate emotion. I'm like, what am I doing? What? It doesn't make any
Where did
sense.
that come from?
Where did that come from? What's wrong with me? I mean, I know what's wrong
Did
with
you
me. Yeah.
did you write that before the pandemic? Because if not, you might have a little bit of a fortune telling thing going on.
Oh, uh, full full disclosure, I I experienced some mental health issues, and this is all related. During in 2019, before this all really started kicking off, it started in China, obviously, but I had heard word of this coronavirus that was starting to spread from Wuhan, and I had a complete psychotic episode about the virus and saying
Wow.
it was coming, it was coming, it was coming, and it's going to kill me and things like that. And so I got committed into hospital for it. And then about 4 or 5 months later, we had our first case.
Exactly. Yeah. And not only that, but you're a science fiction writer. How could you not take off down that? It wasn't even a rabbit hole. It
Oh
was
yeah,
scarier than, like, it's stranger than fiction, and this was scarier than horror stories.
I
So
mean, who? I mean, yeah. It's. I think Stephen King's the one that says he gets approached by people with their masks on, saying, "I feel like I'm living in one of your novels."
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so yeah, I
it's
I,
a.
I understand that.
But yeah, the no. So the aliens actually did come from. They came from when I was in 2014. Actually, when I was 14, it was this whole. The idea was that these creatures didn't want their face to be revealed to enemies, and that was the whole idea. And now
Yeah,
it's a now now it's a reality. Well, actually,
that's very cool.
I don't know if you guys still have masks in the US, do you?
Uh, yes and no. Some of the cities where there's been an uptick in this new strain are requiring them again. Where I live now, I wear them when I go into shopping areas
Right.
or the grocery store. It's not, places are not requiring them, but I'm very pleased to see that a lot of people are
Right,
still
yeah.
wearing them.
Being responsible, yeah. Okay, and oh, it just feels like we just started, but the final question, I think. Oh no, no, sorry, one more after this. What changes would you like to see in female protagonists in fiction written by men?
Oh, that is such a good question. It is so hard for most men that I have in my group, very difficult for them to write women. There's a couple of them that I really like them, but I get so irritated with them. I've said, a woman is not going to say that. And of course, one of them explained to me how women felt. And I said,
Oh.
that did not, you can imagine that did not over well with me. I
No.
said, well, thank you for mansplaining, but I believe I know how I feel. And I think men who really want to do it are good listeners. They'll listen to it and they'll also be careful about the character they create. They can't overstep. If I have a male character, I can go just so far before I'm not sure if
Right.
I'm going with it in the right direction. It's almost as same as putting an ethnic person in or different ethnicity than yours in your book and pretending you know how they feel.
Right. Yeah.
You can react to how they act and you can question what they say, but you can't know. So I always, and the bravest men in our writing group would listen and would change it. And it was gratifying. And the others, I'm sorry, they're not going to get published because women aren't going to read it. And I don't think men would have read it. But that's one cool thing about science fiction. One of the women in my Wild Women group writes science fiction, and she's about to have her first novel come out, Aries, right, descending, Aries descending,
Right.
and it's set on Mars, and her protagonist is a woman, and the woman, she's not an alien. It's not an it's There's no alien interaction,
Right.
but so it's easier for her to maintain certain feelings because people haven't changed as much the way they think and act or feel. Their circumstances change and the way circumstances define them changes. But it's so fun to have, she's got this, pardon me, but kick ass character who is just taking no prisoners, but she also becomes a mother.
Right.
And and one of the men was having a hard time understanding that she understood, the main character was like, I'm a mother now. I will have to stay while someone else goes right now. And he said, well, she resents it. I said, she doesn't resent it. She's just recognizing her reality and she's got to work with her reality. And I think that may be the hardest thing for men to write is because it's a different reality.
Yeah,
It's
because
changing.
I know for men that wouldn't stop us keep.
No, it
I
wouldn't.
think we know we've had enough bad fathers out there to know that if a child doesn't stop a lot of men from carrying on with whatever they were doing.
Right. And we are used to the trade-offs. And we I don't know that we're more patient, but we know that if we wait, we can still do it.
Right.
So I think it's kind of like me. I didn't give up a great deal, but working and raising a family, I didn't have the presence of mind to do any serious writing. I
Right.
just kept formalizing stories. But I was okay with it because I can do it. I can do it when I can.
Right. And you're not like and I think I don't know who it was that described it to me, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But women seem to have this better operational mind. Like you're
Do more than one
able
thing.
able to bring things together a lot easier. And men, we just a lot of men don't have. We have a lot of ambition. I know women do too, but I'm saying our ambition usually means we will throw our firstborn son overboard if we can, if it will make us go a bit faster. We were very much creatures that are driven, but there are some men who aren't. Obviously,
Oh, yes.
there are some men who are wonderful fathers and wonderful husbands, or and whatever, or boyfriends or whatever. But
That's
yeah,
interesting because when you said that about multitasking, I mean, I know I do a better job when I don't multitask, when
right,
I
yeah,
just focus, but my brain is better at it. And maybe that's why, because like women have ambition, but we know we have to do this and this and this as well. And men, because they have trouble with the this and this and that, they just center on
They,
that one thing.
yeah,
And some of that's positive. I mean, because like I said, I can multitask. I do a better job when I don't.
right.
But that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I know, I know that because of my illness, I'm considered disabled in New Zealand, and so because of that, I am able to write fully
Oh,
and
that's good.
do all this stuff to work on an author platform. That's what the whole purpose of this podcast, because
Right.
hopefully I'll be able to sell. But yeah, I think yeah, I'm just not. I just that's that's something else. But so do you have any other tips for authors or for aspiring authors? Anything like
Well,
marketing wise or anything like that?
well, first, that I hear so many people say that they don't really, that other people's opinion is fine, but they know exactly what they were trying to say and what. Don't do that. Keep your mind open. Do not think that you know everything about it, because you don't, especially if you want people to read it. And I, as an English teacher, I do my own editing, but I use some different programs.
Right.
There's quite a few free ones out there that really help me. If you're not comfortable, or if you aren't an editing person, or punctuation is not your thing, then you need a good, solid editor. Um, that's the one thing I think that gives some self-published authors not such a great reputation. And I don't have a thing in the world against self-published authors. If that's the way you want to go, there's some great advantages to it. But no, you accept criticism, work with criticism, don't think you know everything. But at the same time, once you hit your voice and you're being true to it, don't try to write what you don't try to change it to sell it, because it probably won't work.
No. Right.
And I got to be honest, it's not like I'm selling on the bestseller list. I'm just thrilled that I have a publisher, and I have the problem of trying to find out how to get more people to read me. But it's and don't get discouraged.
Yeah.
Just don't get discouraged.
Don't
Keep
get
going.
knocked down. And finally, now I worded this a bit stupidly. Um, how do you make not perfect as in perfect? I mean a brilliant female protagonist, regardless of gender. Like, is there a formula, or is there a way of thinking that can make or break this sort of thing?
Well, for me, the brilliant protagonist has to start either needing something, trying to overcome something. It's like the hero's journey.
Right.
And we were trying to decide if the hero's journey, oh, there you go. If the hero's journey, it's on your back wall. If the hero's journey is different for the heroine. And at first I was like, yes, it is. And then I've gone back and forth with that. But the important thing to me is that your character is relatable. Now, a lot of people now are writing characters that you don't like. Like, if I don't know about if you've read Gone Girl, but there's a whole Gone Girl tradition where the main character, you really don't root for her. That's very hard to do. Very hard to do. And I think it's been done as well as it's going to be. And it's not fun to write. I just couldn't spend that much time with someone that I didn't like, or that I didn't know she was going to redeem herself in some way. So I like women characters who have the strength. We can see it. They may not always see it. It becomes more obvious to them, and they come into their own. And that's really it for me. Their relationships, there's a couple of romances in mine. They're not romance books. I'm not good at that. But my second book, The Unreliables, there's no love interest, or really not a substantial love interest. And one of the men in my group said, do you think that's going to be a problem, that she doesn't end up with a man? And I said, I don't know, but I can't do it any other way. That's who she is. And
Yeah,
maybe
some
in another
people.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get what you mean. Some people just aren't ready for a relationship. Some people are just
Well,
yeah,
she's a widow. And
Oh yeah,
she's just
yeah,
come out.
perfect.
She's just devastated, and for her to pop in and have a hot boyfriend, that wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't be right. So and it's published. So I I
So,
got my publisher got it. So yeah, yes, exactly. And he was being kind. He was just
oh yeah.
asking. Yeah, he was just asking.
I
But
mean, it's important, I think, to turn off that. No, sorry, I should say that differently. It's important to turn off your sensitivity when you're taking criticism, because sometimes people are just asking questions.
exactly.
Sometimes they're
And
not
and
malicious. Yeah. So
exactly. And if they are, you don't be bothered with them for long anyway. Just don't even answer. Just move on.
brilliant. So also I have to bring this up because it's something that I get that a lot of sci-fi readers ask, and it's the dreaded Mary Sue. Have you heard?
Oh, yes, go ahead. I think I know what you're talking about.
So when you're giving, especially for female characters, because a lot of men will either overcorrect or undercorrect, giving them challenges to overcome, but also being mindful of how they would react to those challenges. Is that sort of where you come from when you say you give them difficulty?
Yes, and then sometimes they're in actual physical danger,
Right.
and they're brave. They're going to react to it, but they're not going to react to it by picking up um, a gun and going at And my female characters rescue themselves. They
Right.
don't wait around for someone to rescue them, but they do it in such a way. Sometimes they bumble a little bit before they get it right,
Right.
and that but they do it, and then they know that that they have. But they also, like my protagonist in my second book, she has the opportunity to take a life, and she can't. That's not part of her. Now she doesn't have a bit of trouble banging people over the head with trash cans, but she's not going to want to shoot if only she would if she had to.
Right.
But if there's another way, that there's a more natural, true to her self way. The only time that mine get ferocious, one of them has a child, and she would have absolutely no trouble doing whatever it took to protect the child.
Which is
But yeah, you
realistic.
have to,
Yeah.
yes, but you have to, that's it. You just have to be realistic about it. You can't take a woman who has been in the sewing circle and then she takes a knitting needle and pokes it in someone's eye.
Yeah.
You can't take her that fast. She's got to have some reasoning.
Gotta
So,
have some
yes,
steps. And so I know in my writing, I try. I'm. I desperately want to not make the love interest of my male protagonist just you know, a
a
trophy,
prop.
a
Yeah.
trophy, and yeah. So I've often thought, well, how am I going to do that? And so oftentimes I'll be like, okay, she's going to go along with him on the adventures, and she's going to be an important part. But then there's also the element of she's experienced, more experienced than him, but not as experienced as she could be. And so it's being mind. I think it's another question would be is how do you balance that, having her go up against things that she may lose at, but also making sure she doesn't look like a chump every single time.
Yes, uh, I think it's like in any relationship that really works. If you, there are things that one of you is going to naturally be better at,
Yeah.
and you balance each other, but you also teach each other. So your heroine, or your well, she's a heroine, I
Yeah.
suppose,
Yeah.
if you're coming at it that way, your heroine is going to offer options that the hero wouldn't think about, but she's going to learn when those options won't work.
Right.
So they both have to be open to learning, and that's another thing that you can do. Maybe the hero isn't getting it right every time. Maybe she advises him, wait a minute, and he's like, okay, he sees that her plan. So a mutual respect between the characters, I think, will pop off the page and do what you want it to.
Thank you. I- this is all just a sham to get writing advice. No,
Sorry, no problem. Because it's always fun to talk about writing,
oh,
and
yeah.
it also it's always helpful to me. It clarifies it for me.
Oh, I mean, I know watching writer interviews, it's, there seems to be a disconnect between writers and readers, people who don't intend on writing. And it's always, to me, it's always the same question. It's where do you get your ideas from? And if you ask that, generally, I don't think you are of that persuasion just because you would know that you have no clue.
Now, the first book I got published, I did get the idea from. It involves, well, I changed it so much that you can barely see it, but it basically involved a young woman who goes, she runs away to Ecuador, or she runs away to an island country with a man she shouldn't have gone with, and she
Right.
ends up being killed. But in my story, she runs away with her sister's fiance
Oh,
to that, so mine just took all these other turns, but the kernel of the idea. And because my so far all of the ones I've written have a little bit of a grief and guilt and redemption thing going on,
right.
a lot of it probably comes from some personal experiences, but they come out so differently you'd never be able to figure out what they were
Oh
if you
yeah,
didn't
I
know.
mean, I think it was Neil Gaiman who said that if you haven't lived a life, you can't really write about a life.
Exactly. Yeah. And your life is going to pop up there.
Yeah,
But what's so funny, I can't remember, we were talking in another writing group about how sometimes you'll think you didn't reveal a thing about yourself
yeah,
in your character. And then you read it and you went, oh, I say that. Or, oh, that is me. Or you think you're some other person in there. And somebody says, you're not like that at all. And I'm like, well, I want to be, but why? But anyway, it's that's why it's so writing is so exciting.
right. Well, I think that's our time. So, thank you so much for being on the program.
And thank you
Um,
for getting up so early for me.
that was Katherine
Nichols.
Nichols.
Yes,
Yes, sorry,
Nichols. Yes.
sorry. I know
Okay.
my name would probably be difficult too, but Um, yes, so thank you for listening as well. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. And would you
I
like to
will.
plug your
Thank you. Yes, I have two books out on Amazon. The first one came out as the that came out is the Sometimes Sister, and the second one is the Unreliables. I'll have another one coming out in December, but I know you won't remember that long. So they're both on Amazon. It's Katherine Nichols, The Sometimes Sister, and The Unreliables. Thank you so much.
All right. Goodbye.